This is Stephen Horn, and welcome to This Week in the Triangle, where I talk about local news here in North Carolina. And for our first story, you would be shocked at what is being taught in Islamic schools here in North Carolina. There is a video being passed around the internet this week from an imam at a mosque and school here in Raleigh defending Mohammed's marriage to a child bride. Now, the context of this video is that it was a debate that was being held at North Carolina State University by one of the Christian student organizations between a Christian pastor and a local imam. And so the Christian pastor brought up the misdeeds of the Prophet Muhammad, including marrying a 6-year-old. And this isn't something that was made up by people who hate Muslims. This is Islamic sources. The Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old. And so what the Islamic or what the imam had to say in response, this Islamic cleric who teaches here in Raleigh, is in Islam, it's understood by consensus, you can marry a child. That is an imam talking about Muslim doctrine. Basically said, as long as you can marry a child, but just, wait till they're mature to consummate the marriage. And he said, I know we have some students from our families, from our acquaintances, the girls, grade 5, they reach maturity. So apparently, according to this imam in Raleigh, 5th grade students are eligible for marriage. Now, we haven't had the same problems with grooming gangs here in North Carolina that they've had in England. That is probably because we have not imported as many Muslims. We can definitely see these same ideas are under the surface, where their culture has very different values in terms of, what is acceptable in regards to young women. And, there's another quote. He said, there's nothing wrong with that. That's their culture. You cannot measure your culture to their culture. That's the question I would have for anyone in North Carolina. Is this culture compatible with North Carolina culture? And if not, what are we going to do about it? Because this is, this is Abdullah Kadra. He is an imam at the Medina Quran and Youth Center in Raleigh. This is not the only mosque in Raleigh. This is not the only Islamic school in Raleigh, though we don't necessarily have that many Muslims here. It is a growing community, and this is what they are being taught. And for our next story, ICE is taking out the trash. A Mexican dreamer who has previously pled guilty to indecent liberties with a child here in Wake County will be deported after also pleading guilty to immigration fraud. So the Immigration Customs Enforcement has Operation False Haven going on, which is where they find foreigners who have committed certain crimes, including sexual crimes here in our country, and basically prosecute them for immigration fraud. Because on certain immigration forms, they basically say, have you committed any of these sexual crimes? Have you ever engaged in, ordered, incited, assisted, or otherwise participated in any of the following: any kind of sexual contact or relations with any person who is being forced or threatened? So Marcelo Soto Luna here in Wake County pled guilty to this immigration fraud and was sentenced to 7 months in federal prison and will be deported at the end of that sentence because he perjured himself when he falsely answered no to that question on his DACA immigration forms. That is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So this is a Mexican who came over to the U.S. when he was a child. The federal law says, I guess they can't deport him just for being an illegal, but they can deport him for lying about being a pedophile, because in 2022, Soto Luna was charged by Nightdale police and ended up pleading guilty to 3 counts of indecent liberties with a child in some sort of sexual abuse he perpetrated on a 7-year-old girl. So that was in Wake Superior Court that he was convicted of it. He was sentenced to 15 to 27 months for that crime. And now with the Fed, 7 months as well. Once all of his sentences has been served, he will be returned to Mexico because he is a Mexican national. We have our next story up here out of Durham. Is Duke collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party? That is what two Republican congressmen have suggested in a letter sent to the university, which lays out some concerning facts about Duke's relationship with Wuhan University in China, which they describe as a national security risk. So they say that Wuhan University is a direct extension of the Chinese military and intelligence apparatus with ties to the Chinese military industrial complex, supervision of Chinese National Defense Technology Agency, the operation of multiple national defense research laboratories, and the training of cyber warfare specialists for the Chinese military. So basically, there is this partnership between Duke University and Wuhan University. Previously they pointed to how Pentagon-funded research at Duke was taken over to China by, a Chinese researcher who basically took this research, took it to China. So this is very concerning because there is this Chinese government obviously seems to be our biggest opponent on the global stage, and they are benefiting from American universities, and even from federally funded research at American universities is being used to help a country that is very likely our next major global adversary. And they also pointed to the Duke Kunshan University, which is sort of it's described as a campus of Duke University, but it's a partnership between Duke University and Wuhan University, and it is in Kunshan, China. And so there was a story not too long ago where the Duke Kunshan University organized a trip for a bunch of Duke University students from the United States to go over to China and, do a sort of, a little tour there, some sort of cross-cultural exchange. And it ended up basically just being propaganda. They had a whole bunch of Chinese media there, saying, "We love China," all that stuff. There is an article, one of the Duke students wrote up about it in the assembly. And so basically, these congressmen are raising the concern, saying, "Hey, we'd prefer if American universities are not in bed with the Chinese government." Now, when I hear Wuhan and North Carolina University, I think of something a little different. I think of something possibly involving the origins of the coronavirus. But apparently, there are two universities in North Carolina that have ties to two separate universities in the same Chinese city or province, I guess. I'm not even sure whether Wuhan is a city or a province. I guess I should know more about China if I'm reporting on it. And our next story, also out of Raleigh, there have now been 3 arrests in the Mother's Day beatdown turned shooting. There is video of this that was published on social media. You can see a man firing shots. There's punches being thrown. And now Raleigh police have made 3 arrests. So it seems from the charges that this was sort of 2 families. It's been described as a brawl in some of the media. What we see from the charges is that one side has been charged, whereas the other side is listed as the victims of a series of assaults. So the 3 who have been charged, it appears to be a mother and a son, as well as a third adult who is listed as having the same Wake Forest residence. And 3 of the 6 victims also have the same last name, suggesting that, they are related. So first up, we have Alexander Ray Barnes, 23 years old. He is being held without bond, and he is allegedly the individual seen in the video firing shots and throwing punches. So he has been charged with assaulting 4 female victims. Police say he shot at the first one and punched her in the face, shot at a second female victim, punched a third female victim in the mouth, and punched a 4th female victim in the face. So he is being held without bond. The Next we have Adrian Thorpe Barnes, 48 years old. She was charged with assaulting 2 of the same victims as Alexander Barnes. One she is accused of punching in the head. The other says she pulled their hair, also punched them in the head. She's also charged with accessory after the fact for allegedly driving Alexander Barnes away from the scene of the crime. And the third arrestee was Jermaine Otario Mitchell, 51 years old. He was charged with a single account of assault with a deadly weapon, inflicting serious injury for assaulting a man with a chair. So what we heard is that, 3 individuals were transported to the hospital. One of those was a graze wound from a bullet, and it didn't seem to be information for sure, but it sounded like the other 2 injuries were caused by the chairs or the fists, and not people who were shot. So those are the 3 arrests that have been made. And our next story, also out of Wake County, but this time Garner, and this time involving the North Carolina prison system, because the question is rehabilitation a pipe dream? So we have a man who had been convicted of 2 murders. He was mistakenly released from prison. And what did he do with his freedom? Did he go get a job, get education, improve himself? No, he went and committed another shooting, shot up another house in Garner, according to the police, which is very similar to the crime he was sentenced to 2 life sentences for when he killed a couple in Garner in 2013. So Jonathan Alejandro Santillan was only 15 when he committed these 2 murders. He was arrested, he was convicted, and originally he was sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole. But he went through an appeals process, and the judge ultimately granted him resentencing. The judge ultimately resentenced him on the grounds that he was pretty young when he committed these crimes. He was also sentenced to other crimes related to, I believe, was a gang shooting prior to the murders, and so he was resentenced to 2 life sentences with the possibility of parole. Now, I believe in North Carolina that is a minimum of 25 years of the life sentences that must be served before the parole can be considered. But due to this resentencing, there is some confusion with the paperwork, and the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction let him out of prison earlier this year. And it was just not too much more than a month after he was let out that Santillan was rearrested for allegedly shooting up a home in Garner where 1 woman was killed and another man he attempted to kill. And he was also charged with hitting and attempting to bite police officers, presumably when they came to arrest him. So when you look at a situation like this, Santillan has been in prison, it looks like, nearly half his life. So he was only 15 years old. Many people would look at a 15-year-old murderer and say, well, maybe he can change. But this individual does not seem to have changed, despite being given the opportunity to do so. And in my opinion, based on what God says about what you should do with murderers, every breath he draws is an injustice, because if a man sheds blood, by man his blood shall be shed. That is the command that God gave to Moses and his descendants, what we should do about murderers, because it is so serious. And when we just keep murderers in prison, what are they going to do? Either they get out, murder more people, or maybe even they murder people in prison. Prison is not the safest place to be. That's my 2 cents. And for our protest watch for this week, we have the North Carolina March for Life that was on Saturday. It doesn't seem like there are too many attendees this year, about 200 from the videos that were posted. There's not as much spirit behind the pro-life movement here in North Carolina. A lot of people look at the 12-week abortion ban as a major victory. But if you look at the numbers, nearly the same number of abortions are being done each month in North Carolina after this ban than before the ban. It's still about 3,000 to 4,000 abortions a month. That was the numbers from 2023 when the ban was passed. We don't necessarily have the most updated numbers, but there are still a lot of abortions being done. We don't, and those are just the abortions at clinics that they keep track of. There's more and more self-managed abortions where people order these abortion drugs and do them, basically just take the drugs and complete the abortion without as much, I guess, medical oversight. So abortions still are very much happening. And, if you're someone who does not want that to be happening, then, you should definitely pay attention and definitely let your Republican legislators know, because there is a bill to fully abolish abortion that was proposed in the House this year. A couple Republican legislators signed on, but by and large, the Republican majority or supermajority in the chambers of the legislature are not really interested in doing anything to further limit abortion. So, if you head over to thisweekinthetriangle.com, you can find all of the sources and all the stories I went over this week. Thanks for tuning in.